My good people, welcome to the latest episode of Jonathan Thinks. I am your host, the friendly neighborhood democracy scholar, Jonathan Collins. I've got a few things on my mind, and maybe, just maybe, you've been thinking about it too. The first thing on my mind is this Justin Fairfax story. So, for those of you who don't know, there's this deeply, deeply disturbing story involving former Virginia Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax. Now, police say Fairfax fatally shot his estranged wife, Dr. Serena Fairfax, before taking his own life in their Annandale, Virginia home, with their two children in the house at the same time, just sitting right upstairs. It's a horrifying story, just at a human level. A father, a black man, taking the life of his wife and taking his own life and essentially leaving his kids now as orphans. They're teenage kids, but these teenage kids now no longer have parents. And it's a sad story for all parties involved, but it brings forward something that I really want to talk about, something that I think is really important, something that has become, I think, a running theme in some stories that we have seen across weeks now. And that is the importance of not letting status and fame and this desire to be liked and respected and loved publicly be the thing that feeds into your own demise. And I'm speaking specifically to black men when thinking about this dilemma. So this Justin Fairfax story, for those of you who don't know, like I said, he served as lieutenant governor of the state of Virginia. This was a guy who had a very promising political career. Elected as lieutenant governor of the state of Virginia in 2017. He was on a meteoric rise where there was expectation that he would then successfully run for governor of the state of Virginia. In fact, the first time Justin Fairfax encountered political scandal, it was actually for being connected to the governor who he sat under, right? So I don't know if you all remember this, but Ralph Northam was governor, wins the gubernatorial election, I think is in 2017, the same year that Justin Fairfax is campaigning for lieutenant governor. I can't remember if it was during the campaign or even actually after his election, but these pictures surfaced of Governor Ralph Northam as a college student wearing blackface and being a part of a white fraternity that had a very racist history. And there were a lot of calls for Ralph Northam to step down. We have so many of these crazy moments that it's hard to keep track of them all. But this was at the time a really big deal. And there were questions as to whether Justin Fairfax was actually going to step into the governor's seat as his boss was caught in all this controversy. As Justin Fairfax's name started to get floated around for the governor's seat, suddenly these allegations came out about his sexual conduct or sexual misconduct from when he was younger. And these allegations came from two separate women. One, a woman named Meredith Watson, claimed that Fairfax sexually assaulted her when they were both students at Duke, undergraduate students in college. And then there's Vanessa Tyson, a fellow political scientist who I know personally, also came out and accused Justin Fairfax of sexually assaulting her at a hotel during the 2004 Democratic National Convention in Boston. Now, Justin Fairfax vehemently denied the allegations. I know Vanessa very well. I don't know her to be someone who would make such an accusation without any credit, without it being true, without it being credible. But nonetheless, this created a downward spiral for Justin. He ultimately ended up running for governor of Virginia in 2021, but his name had been sullied. He had gotten no support from the Democratic Party of the state of Virginia. And as a result, he did poorly in the Democratic primary for the governor's race in 2021. After that, apparently he struggled to even revive his law practice, to bring in clients, to be able to practice law and earn money. And then he went on some rampage, essentially to try and clear his name. He was consumed with the reputation change that had happened to him. He could not accept that the public now viewed him in this way. And I think the most important parts of the story are, one, this has revived a conversation that we really should be talking about, which is I'm seeing a lot of conversation about femicide, and it is violent domestic harm done to women. And we're seeing Black women in particular now, being victims of femicide. And we need to be talking about things that we can do culturally, politically, policy wise that can protect Black women from Black men or the Black women in the home, because this is getting out of hand. Too many women are literally just left unsafe by the person who is supposed to love them the most. And I think that's something that we are all too complicit in, and that we should be more action oriented around addressing that problem. So that's the big one. Again, the other thing is now these two kids suddenly don't have parents. And that, as a parent, that's the thing that breaks my heart, is that what gets to the third thing, which is his ego and his pride and his desire to be accepted and his desire, to be praised and his desire to be, seen as this beloved public figure. It seems like it drove him to levels of just violence and irreparable harm. And it ruined not only his life, but the lives of the people around him, the lives of the people he encountered. Like, every accusation against Justin Fairfax shares that theme. This was a young man of ambition and aspiration. And in moments of privacy, for some reason, that ambition turned into and motivated violence, specifically against women, specifically against Black women. And so I think this is a story, to me, is a wake up call to Black men, that I know we talk a lot about mental health and we should continue to talk about mental health. But to me, the mental health conversations can sometimes be too imprecise. Protect your mental health, protect your mental health. Yes, protect your mental health. Go to therapy. Have someone to talk to about these things. Because the most important thing we should be thinking about outcome wise when it comes to our mental health, honestly, is peace of mind, acceptance, and like truly loving yourself. Because when I hear this Justin Fairfax story, to me, this sounds like a Black man who did not love himself, that looked in the mirror and what he saw wasn't enough, that not seeing enough became a conduit to enacting violence, and the inability to just show contrition for your action, to just publicly apologize for the harm that you've caused, and to just make a public commitment to trying to be a better person. Instead of doing that, he entered even more of a downward spiral, and his life ends in just indescribable violence, unnecessary violence. So I say this to my brothers, like, we have to find peace of mind. We have to be enough. Can't look for validation in the titles, in public perception, in being quote unquote the man. Because I think it's killing us. And I think it's killing those of us who are around us. This quest, this desire to be the man. Because it brings me to another recent story, which is the death of Afrika Bambaataa. So Afrika Bambaataa, founder and leader of Universal Zulu Nation. This is one of the founders of hip hop, right? Basically what has become the most important genre of music in my life, and really one of the most important genres of music now in the world. He is one of the founders and architects of that music, that sound, that culture. He was one of the architects of the concept of sampling, and he was an architect of some of the cultural aspects of hip hop, DJing, the parties, emceeing, right? Like the kind of fundamental principles of hip hop. Afrika Bambaataa, Universal Zulu Nation was right there. And I think this puts us in a position where it's a good reminder to appreciate the work of the collective. That we absolutely have to love and appreciate what hip hop is and has been as a function of the larger coalition of architects, and to not put too much stock in uplifting and deifying individual architects of the movement. To me now, the story of hip hop and Afrika Bambaataa's contribution to it should be more about Universal Zulu Nation and less about Africa himself, less about Bambaataa himself, because as folks have probably heard, his legacy is complicated by very serious and concerning allegations of sexual abuse, that he sexually abused multiple young boys. And this was something that folks in the industry, in these hip hop circles, all understood to be happening in real time. Before he died, he lost a civil suit in court and was forced to pay up. And there have been hip hop giants who have been pushing us to forget about his legacy of harm and only focus on his legacy of cultural creation. And I think that's dangerous. It's dangerous because it goes back to the original point here, which is we cannot let ego consume us, right? We can't let ego consume us. When people like Afrika Bambaataa experience this kind of cultural success, when you turn literally nothing into something, which is the creation of hip hop, there is a certain level of notoriety you amass. You become a worldwide figure, the same way that Justin Fairfax becomes a statewide, if not a national figure. But you cannot let that define who you are. Because I think what's happening is we see Black men who are allowing the success, the notoriety, the fame to define them. And that, again, that becomes either a motivation to enact harm or reason to believe that they can enact harm on others without any type of accountability or repercussion. And that's dangerous. It's dangerous for those around us, but it's also dangerous for ourselves. Because who are we if we lose ourselves, right? Who are we if you're not in tune with who you really are? Because I would like to believe that these Black men were not violent. Not because I don't believe the accusers. Quite the opposite. I 100% believe the accusers. I would like to believe that these Black men are not violent because there's also the problem of and the stereotype of Black men being considered innately and irrationally violent. I would like to think that there is a reason, not a good reason, but there is a reason why Justin Fairfax and Afrika Bambaataa were engaging in harm. And I do think that that reason centers around their inability to control the ego, the inability to find happiness and love and content and being just who they are and just loving themselves and loving who they are. Look, I'm I'm not a governor of a state. I'm not a famous rapper, but I am now an Ivy League professor. I'm teaching at my second Ivy League school. And I went through the transition of being just some skinny kid on a campus as a graduate student that nobody really knew to now suddenly being Professor Collins on a campus and how you're treated and how you're seen. You know, my new role is I'm on the school board for the city of New York, Department for Educational Policy. And I remember doing my first school visit and show up at this school and I'm greeted by people from the district and I'm treated like a dignitary. And it's different. It's different. And think for me, in that moment, in these moments, I see why it's important to go back home to my wife and my kids who still see me as Jonathan, as dad. To be able to then go back and talk to my mom and my dad on FaceTime and they see me as Jonathan. And I feel loved and I feel appreciated and I feel supported, but I'm reminded of who I am. And I think that's what I want for these Black men, right? For us as Black men to be constantly reminded of who we are and for that to be okay. Because what we're seeing again is when we lose sight of that, everyone suffers. Everyone suffers. Speaking of suffering, it's still going down in Iran, y'all. It is still going down. So this Iran story has been going on for weeks now. We're a few weeks past the initial decision to initiate strikes. We as the U.S. Initiating strikes on Iran. Earlier this month, President Trump agreed to a 2-week ceasefire tied to negotiations and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But as of today, shipping is still only partially restored, and the Associated Press is reporting that Iran has reimposed restrictions and fired on a tanker. So this is no longer a story about a president who's trying to engage in some kind of like strong man, forceful, uh, hyper masculine negotiation, right? Because that's been the issue. Trump has been treating this like, oh, this is just one of my deals. I'm just doing a deal with Iran. I'm using force, I'm making threats, but ultimately I'm just here to cut a deal. The problem is Iran is not looking for a deal. They are showing that they are willing to take losses if it means standing on business. Thousands of casualties at this point, and that they are unfazed. Again, like I told you, this is complicated. Iran is a country running off of Sharia law, right? This means that they believe that the country that they're fighting for is a responsibility that they have to God. You don't just come to these people and say, hey, I'm here to make a deal. I don't care how much of a strong man you consider yourself to be. I don't care how many bombs you threaten to drop or actually drop. We are at a point now where we really need this conflict to resolve itself because the whole reason why Iran has been an adversary to the US in the first place is the threat of nuclear warfare. This is a country that has uranium and nuclear capacity. They're not the ones to play with. I'm not saying we should be afraid of Iran. I am saying we should be very careful with Iran because you're not going to just bully them. You're not treating Iran like you treated Venezuela. You want trouble, they want the same thing. So the best that we can hope is that the upcoming midterm elections become such a motivating force for Donald Trump to do something to resolve this Iran situation, because we know Congress isn't stepping in. But I'm telling you, if this conflict is still in the same place that it is now, where it's leading to rising gas prices and domestic costs at home, there's no clear inroad on how the conflict will be resolved. If Iran is showing no willingness to capitulate, and we're also not seeing any coordination with countries from Europe, no axis of power aligning around the U.S., where the U.S. still continues to act pretty much unilaterally or really just in coalition in partnership with Israel. That's the only ally working with the U.S. in this conflict. From a foreign policy standpoint, you want multilateral action. You want the U.S. coordinating with other countries. You want some signal that you are on the right side of this ideologically, and that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing the U.S. act pretty much alone, and we're seeing a president that thinks he can bully his way in and out of this. And we're seeing a country in Iran that's saying, I don't care if you're bigger, I don't care if you're badder, you're not going to bully us. And so, hey, Donald Trump, you got into the midterms. If you don't, I guarantee you, we are going to see a major swing. You know how I know? Look at what's happening now. Just had a special election just across the river in New Jersey. Analilia Mejia, Dominican woman labor organizer, former staffer for Bernie Sanders, working class, working party politics, just won a congressional seat, a House seat. The House seat occupied by now New Jersey Governor Mickey Sherrill. Mejia won this seat by a landslide. This is a congressional seat in New Jersey that before Mickey Sherrill held it was a Republican seat. This has been the rare place where residents were voting Democrat in presidential elections, but on the House seats, they were voting Republican. And now you're seeing the Democratic Party get a complete grip on it. Combine this with, hey, 2022, gubernatorial elections that we saw. 4 seats flipped. 3 of the 4 seats that flipped from Republican to Democrat. Only one flipped from Democrat to Republican. I'm saying there's momentum here. You combine the continued inflation with this ongoing conflict in Iran and with all this goofy stuff that's happening with the cabinet, with Pam Bondi and whatever Kash Patel is supposed to be doing. This is a recipe for disaster for the Republican Party. And things are trending towards a foreclosure, right? A foreclosure. That's going to be the Republicans losing the House. They're probably going to lose the Senate. And now Donald Trump, who has already been Mr. Executive Order, won't have Congress to bully around anymore. Now you're going to have an activated Democratic Party run Congress that is going to put bills on his desk that he is going to have to face pressure to be able to sign or veto. And we can finally see some stalemates happening in Congress and some pressure applied to a president that's been able to do whatever he really wants to do over the last year plus. And that is this latest episode of Jonathan Thinks. Special shout out to my producer, Mo, who works behind the scenes. Remember that every time we convene, it's an opportunity to grow. We do it with love. We do it with joy. We do it together. These were a few of my thoughts. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, you were thinking about it too. In fact, let me know what you're thinking. Hit the comments. Hit me up on social media. Let me know what you think. What do you think about the ongoing violence that's happening against Black women, the femicide that's happening against women and Black women in particular? Let me know what you think about, the Justin Fairfax situation, about Afrika Bambaataa. Let me know what you think about the Iran conflict. Let me know what you think about the upcoming midterm elections. Are you predicting also a Democratic Party takeover? Do you think the Republicans will keep the Senate but maybe still lose the House? Do you think all this is smoke and mirrors and actually the Republicans will keep both the upper and lower houses? It's something that we can track and monitor and talk about together and follow closely. There's a little bit of evidence, like I said, that things are trending for the Democratic Party, but, things could change. We still got some time until the midterm elections. But let me know. And until next time, peace.